Nilton Santos knew which way Garrincha was going. So did almost every defender who faced him. They still could not stop him. In 1953, at a Botafogo training session, the unknown winger repeatedly beat Brazil's established left back, at one point slipping the ball through his legs. Nilton urged the club to sign him. The moment became a perfect introduction to Garrincha. The pause, the feint, the defeated defender. It would also become the image that followed him. 9 years later, when Pelé was injured at the World Cup, the winger on the right became the central player of the world champions. So why has the dribble survived more clearly than the footballer behind it? Repetition was part of Garrincha's control. He did not always beat a defender to leave him behind. Sometimes he passed him, slowed down and allowed him to return, as though the duel itself still had use. The crowd knew another feint was coming. The defender knew he was being invited into the same mistake. This is the Garrincha who traveled most easily through time. The winger facing a fullback, the shift of the body, the sudden gap, the laughter in the stands. He became known as the joy of the people because his football made superiority look playful. The touchline seemed to belong to him. The fullback became part of the scene. The pleasure was real. So was the damage to the other team. A winger who repeatedly beats his fullback changes far more than one duel. A second defender has to move across. A midfielder starts protecting the outside. The center backs turn towards the wing, unsure whether Garrincha will cross early, reach the goal line, or cut inside. Teammates find space because several opponents are now arranging themselves around one man. The dribble was what everyone saw. Around it, the defense was being pulled out of shape. Botafogo understood this quickly. Garrincha made his first team debut in 1953 and scored 3 times. Over the following years, the club built one of Brazil's strongest sides around players such as Nilton Santos, Didi, Garrincha, and later, Amarildo and Zagallo. But Botafogo's most recognizable movement often began on the right. The ball reached Garrincha. The pitch opened. Brazil took longer to trust him. Before the 1958 World Cup, there were doubts about whether his decisions were too unpredictable for a national team. He did not start the tournament in the side. When he came in against the Soviet Union, Brazil's opening minutes became one of the lasting images of that World Cup. Garrincha hit the post, Pelé struck the crossbar, and Vavá scored soon afterwards. Brazil won its first world title. Pelé, 17 years old, became the revelation who announced a new football power to the world. Garrincha was essential in the later stages, but his place in the story was easier to describe beside others. He was the devastating winger in a great attack, the man whose dribbling and service helped release the team through the middle. 4 years later, that arrangement was gone. Brazil arrived in Chile for the 1962 World Cup as defending champion. Pelé was no longer the teenage discovery of Sweden. He was expected to be the center of the tournament, the player around whom Brazil's supremacy would continue. In the second match, against Czechoslovakia, he suffered a muscle injury. His World Cup was over. Brazil still had the experience of its 1958 champions. Didi controlled midfield. Vavá played at center forward. Zagallo worked from the left, and Amarildo was ready to replace Pelé. But the player expected to carry the greatest attacking responsibility was now outside the team. What followed is often reduced to a familiar phrase: Garrincha won the World Cup for Brazil. That gives too little credit to a side of such quality. It is also closer to the truth than the smaller role he is sometimes given now. With Pelé absent, Garrincha remained on the right. Brazil simply began asking much more from him. The ball went his way whenever a match needed to be opened. He became the player opponents had to contain, and Brazil expected to create the advantage. The quarterfinal against England showed how far that change had gone. Early in the match, Garrincha moved inside for a corner and scored with a header. It was an unfamiliar sight, the small winger rising among larger bodies and directing the ball into the net. England equalized, and the game remained tense until Springett failed to hold a Garrincha free kick, and Vavá scored from the rebound. A few minutes later, Garrincha received the ball outside the area and curled Brazil's third beyond the goalkeeper. This was not the usual picture of Garrincha waiting near the touchline. He was arriving in the penalty area, shooting from range, creating goals and deciding where England had to defend. Against Chile in the semi-final, the pressure increased. The hosts had the crowd behind them and the possibility of reaching a World Cup final at home. Garrincha scored twice again, first with a left-footed shot from outside the area, then with another header. Brazil won 4-2. By then, the tournament had begun to gather around him. He had scored 4 goals across the quarterfinal and semi-final and driven the attack of the defending champions. Even Chilean supporters, watching him eliminate their team, had become captivated by him. Near the end of the semi-final, he was sent off after retaliating against Honorino Landa. His place in the final became uncertain. Garrincha was eventually allowed to play, and Brazil defeated Czechoslovakia 3-1 to retain the World Cup. The final did not bring the same spectacular numbers as the 2 matches before it. Garrincha's decisive work had already been done. Brazil had reached it because the player associated with freedom on the wing had taken on the weight left by Pelé's injury. For a few weeks in Chile, Garrincha was the central competitive force of the best national team in the world. That kind of authority is difficult to preserve. It lives across whole matches. A second defender starts moving earlier. Teammates keep sending the ball towards the right when they need relief. Opponents alter their shape before Garrincha has even received it. Remove those surrounding minutes, and much of his control disappears. Garrincha returned from Chile at the height of his fame. Later that year, Botafogo faced Flamengo in the decisive match of the Rio Championship before an enormous Maracanã crowd. Once again, the game bent towards the right wing. Garrincha scored the first goal, helped force the second, and scored the third, as Botafogo won 3-0. One came after he drove towards the penalty area and finished from inside the box. Again, the player known for taking the ball outside the fullback was deciding a major match from several positions. But the celebration left another image. While Botafogo marked the title, Garrincha was dealing with pain in his knee. From there, the gap became harder to hide. Crowds still arrived expecting the same pause and burst. Botafogo still relied heavily on the attention he drew, and his presence continued to bring crowds. His body could no longer reproduce the old movement without cost. The right knee deteriorated. There were disagreements over rest, treatment, and surgery. Garrincha also resisted medical advice at different points. Club obligations, financial pressure, and his own choices became tangled together. He kept playing through pain because his presence mattered, even as the man entering the field moved further away from the Garrincha people expected. A dribbler depends on small physical advantages. The defender has to shift first. The winger needs strength in the supporting leg to stop, confidence in the knee to change direction, and enough acceleration to use the opening. When those fractions disappeared, the image of Garrincha remained. The movement became harder to finish. That was especially cruel because his football had always looked so natural. The public saw instinct, ease, and pleasure. The damaged cartilage, injections, swelling, and recovery time belonged to another part of the story, mostly out of sight. Botafogo did not create everything that followed, and Garrincha was not without responsibility. His later years included choices that harmed himself and others. Alcohol became destructive. His personal life brought pain, public scrutiny, and instability. The story cannot be cleaned into one of an innocent man ruined entirely by football. But football had learned to value him through his availability. While he could still draw a crowd and trouble a defense, his body remained useful. Once the movement began to fail, there was little around him that could replace the identity and income his football had provided. He left Botafogo in 1965. There were later appearances for Corinthians, Portuguesa Carioca, Atlético Junior in Colombia, Flamengo, Olaria, and smaller sides. Each return carried the same hope. Perhaps the old Garrincha might appear inside the damaged body. There were flashes. There was no true recovery. At the 1966 World Cup, Brazil beat Bulgaria in Garrincha's final international victory. Pelé and Garrincha both scored. In the next match, Brazil lost to Hungary. It was the only defeat Garrincha experienced in 50 appearances for the national team, and his last match for Brazil. The seleção was changing too. The side, held together by familiarity and accumulated understanding in 1958 and 1962, looked disordered in England. Garrincha, 32 and physically reduced, could no longer pull the match towards his wing as he once had. His public farewell came in December 1973 at the Maracanã, the stadium filled to honor a player whose serious career had already ended in stages. He appeared for a Brazilian selection against a team of international players, wearing the yellow shirt once more. During the first half, play stopped so that he could leave the field and receive the crowd's tribute. At a farewell match, the old player returns, the crowd applauds, and football is allowed a clean ending. Garrincha's career had not ended cleanly. The Maracanã still showed how much of the bond remained. People had not stopped loving him because they could no longer expect the old run down the right. He died in January 1983, at 49. His body lay in state at the Maracanã. From there, the funeral procession traveled towards Pau Grande, the factory town where he had grown up and first played football, without the plans that usually organize professional careers. People lined the route. Cars followed the coffin. Brazil said goodbye to the joy of the people with an affection few footballers have received. That affection helped preserve him. It also shaped the Garrincha who survived. He became the bent-legged genius, the innocent dribbler, the man who played for pleasure and could not manage life beyond the touchline. Those descriptions hold parts of him. They keep his football human. They help explain why one repeated feint could feel intimate to thousands of people. Pelé remained easier to place in the formal history of greatness. Goals, records, 3 World Cups, Santos, the international reach of Brazilian football. Garrincha survived through a different kind of archive. Short sequences, defenders falling away, stories from those who saw him, joy followed by decline. Later generations can recognize Garrincha at once and still struggle to measure the player in front of them. The dribble looks complete inside the clip. Missing are the minutes when opponents stopped attacking down his side because their fullback needed help, the teammates who searched for him under pressure, and the World Cup that changed its center after Pelé was injured. Calling Garrincha perhaps the greatest dribbler football has known is no insult. The dribble was how he controlled matches. It broke defensive plans and changed the feeling inside a stadium. In 1962, he did the work expected of one of football's defining players. He took responsibility after Brazil lost its greatest star. He scored in different ways, created chances, drew defenders, and carried the champions through the matches that could have ended their tournament. Brazil has not forgotten him. The nickname remains, the legs remain, the pause remains. Nilton Santos still leans one way in the story of that first training session, and Garrincha still takes the ball somewhere else. What has faded is the scale around those movements. The surviving images keep the pleasure of his football alive. They do not always carry the authority of the player who produced it, or the weight placed on his body while he still could. Garrincha did not become smaller after he died. The version football carried forward did.